All right, thank you so much, Fanele, and we appreciate your time and for coming here at Waterford Kamhlaba. How does it feel to be back home?
Thanks for having me. No, it's cool. The place is like really, it's changed. I mean, in some ways it's the same, but in other ways it's changed. There's a feel of just a newness to the whole place, which I think it just comes with time, right? It's been however long it's been since I was here, so it's
What
really
is it
nice.
that has changed that wasn't there at the time? Like
I
I saw
don't.
you were under those flags.
Yeah. So I think that's one thing. Like the growth of the UWC movement, as captured by the flags, is one thing. I think this place itself is kind of matured. I think I was just having a conversation with one of the advancement office officials, Loguti. Over time, like the experiences and expectations of learners at this age has changed just societally, and I think Waterford reflects that sort of in a more sort of global global sense, contrast to like what you might see in a sort of more local view. So it looks lovely. I haven't had a chance to sort of fully walk the campus. I'll do this after the interview, but yeah, it's an exciting and refreshing place.
And how many years did you spend here, by the way?
So I did the full 7. So I came in Form 1. I was a boarder. I stayed down in Langeni, and then I think I left boarding at like Form 3, and went into day student as a day student as had a sibling come here as well, and then I did like some amount of boarding in the IBs a little bit, but yeah, 7 years full gambit.
Okay, can you recall some of the most exciting moments at Waterford? How was?
Yeah, I mean, so I was on the basketball team in my more senior years. We had a couple like big tournaments with AISJs where we would go, and then we went to Durban High School DHS for like some competitive basketball. That was a lot of fun. Did some ad hoc things, so like debating on the school team as well as the national team. That was a good amount of fun. I think academically, I really enjoyed sort of the progression of this is as a physics and math guy, and that stuff was really good as you sort of got on later on in your just.
You were a maths physics type of a person.
Yeah, I was, but I mean, I did a little bit of writing as well. So I did like history higher level. I did economics as well in undergrad, which makes sense given my trajectory subsequently. But yeah, I decent facility with math, so I did some of that stuff. Yeah.
Okay, and can you recall any cast activities that you did at the time?
Yeah, so I kind of charted my own path a little bit on the community service line. I just sort of worked on. There were a couple strategic projects that the principals. She was actually the director of the advancement office at the time. Had sort of more targeted projects that she was kind of working on. There was one on sort of women education in sort of rural areas, sort of upskilling people in sort of vocational training. So there were a lot of strategic projects of interest, let's say, and that was sort of contiguous with the rest of not the rest, the latter part of my education journey. So, for instance, one thing in the IB they had at the time, I don't know if they still have it, like an extended essay. So you write this paper of sorts, and I was so my subjects high level were physics, math, and history.
Okay.
And I wanted to do something in biology. So I had a terribly designed experiment. I got an awful grade, but a terrific education experience from it. So I wanted to think about whether diet affects cognitive function.
At university level, that's what you wanted to do.
No, I wanted to study it specifically just for my extended essay. Okay. So I had a biology question of interest, which was whether or not diet affects cognitive ability, and I was on the chess team. So what I did was I got the chess club, I randomly allocated them into 2 groups, and for one group I had them eat sort of a low protein diet in the canteen, and I watched them over a little bit of time. And then the other group, I went home and asked my mother to cook a protein rich meal and just fed it to them over a period of time, and then had these guys essentially do some chess drills and play with each other, and looked at how people performed in cognitive function and wrote something up. Preparing it to the extent that essay you do over the course of time, I think I blocked out a week of time to sort of have people in the experiment mode, like monitoring it, and like the extent to which people complied with the sleep protocol and so on is difficult to say. And I think my grade reflects that poor experiment design, but it was still nonetheless
And what was the outcome? What did you find?
So I found like if memory serves, sort of defeasible results that kind of suggest that a higher protein diet has a positive impact on cognitive function. But my sample was like n equals 20, so I had like 10 people in both groups. So it wasn't going to get published in the Massachusetts Journal of Biology or whatever.
Okay, so straight from Waterford you went to Harvard.
Yeah, I did.
That must have been like how I know that it must be difficult to get into Harvard for undergrad. I
Yeah.
would imagine.
Yeah.
Like, what contributed to your admission at first instance to go for undergrad at Harvard?
Yeah, I mean, I found myself very fortunate. If you look at the admission statistics, they were very low then, and I think they've gotten more absurd now, like low percentage points, 3-4%, maybe less still now. So when you have those kind of odds, there is a good amount of good fortune associated with it. What contributed to it? I think, interestingly, so I stayed at Harvard for a long time. I did a bunch of things, and I think we'll talk about some of this later, but at some point I then become the head of fellowship. So Harvard sorts the undergrads into houses, similar to like what people think of at Hogwarts. You know, you get a hat and you sort of see how you get sorted in. So you get sorted into these houses, and I was the head of fellowships for one of the houses. And what that means is you sort of help the undergrads. So this is a grad student go through it. And one thing I've learned from that experience, which helped me reflect on my own experience, is something that I think people underestimate is just the importance of having good relationships with your advisors. When you're in high school, it's your teachers, your cast directors, your sports people, and so on. Because, you know, I had good grades, which are required, and so it was good grades, and I was involved in the community broadly. But I think the thing that often gets underestimated is there'll be 10, 15, 20 students for any given slot that meet the on paper quote unquote requirements. So do well in your standardized tests, do well in your grades. But the thing that is really going to resonate with someone beyond what you say about yourself is what the people who've observed you over an extended period of time and have their reputation on the line say about you. And I think I maintained reasonably good relationships with the teachers here, and I think that gave them opportunity to reflect on my character in a way that was compelling, and help the admissions department decide to give me a shot.
So let's be specific now. So what's required? So the application process itself.
Yeah.
They look at the grades, obviously.
Yeah.
And then what else you say that adds into that?
Yeah. So the way the Harvard discusses it now, Harvard's very specific. I think there's the broader group of like highly selective academic institutions. When I talk about them broadly, is there's going to be a requirement that you do well academically. That's one. Because they just want to know you can meet the bar that's required when you're in the program. That's the first thing. Excuse me. The second component is going to be there's going to be a component of it that is your own letter, so what you say about yourself in reflection. So they want to see that this is somebody who's reflective about life experiences and just doesn't go through them unthinkingly. So this is your personal statement. And then there's going to be letters of recommendation, which I think people really underestimate their weight in the admissions process. And having been on the other side of that for some fellowships, that's a big deal. So, and then the final piece is like, especially for the most selective institutions, they're going to want to see what some people call a spike or something like that, something in which you are exceptional in. You don't need to be the best in your class at every single subject you take or every single activity you do, but there needs to be something that you devote a lot of effort to and have managed to cultivate like a really right tail. So think about a bell curve, really right tail outcome. In my case, so I was, like I said, I was on the debate team here and then the national debate team. What we had the good fortune of achieving along the way is at some point we went to the World Championships representing Eswatini, and we were second in the world, and that was like the second time it's ever happened by an African country. South Africa was the first. They'd only done it in like 2006 or something like that at one time in their history. So this was like it was an uncommon outcome, and we put a lot of effort, and again, good fortune played some hand in that. But I think that's what they're going to look at. Good grades, show that you're reflective in your personal statement, have some people write letters of recommendation that sort of reflects on you in a compelling way, your strengths and weaknesses, and then have something in which you've devoted a good amount of effort towards that makes you like sort of a right tail outcome in some sense.
That's very interesting. So one of the things that you are mentioning is debating. I know you're passionate about it. You started it while you were here.
Yeah.
What might have sparked the interest in debate here?
Yeah.
But also I'm interested, I know that you won that world championship. You were at Harvard at the time, isn't it? Can you tell us briefly about that?
Yeah, so what sparked it was silly. Like when I was young, I watched this film I haven't reflected on in a while, but it was kind of a dumb, fun film called My Cousin Vinny, which is about this like makeshift attorney somewhere in the Midwest in the United States just trying to try his hand at lawyering and chancing. And then like I really used to enjoy television at the time, and I'd watched it and memorized a bunch of it. So I had this idea that I was going to be a lawyer at some point. So then I came to Waterford actually incidentally, and it was just complete happenstance. I was a boarder, I was walking around, and there was a student who was in his IB years. I don't know what years. His name is Tato, and he had been in South African school before, and there was a big debate culture there. So he had tried to bring it to Waterford, like in the way that the school encourages student-led initiatives. And I looked at this as like, this is great. I want to pick this up, and I picked it up and did well, there, and then continued with it. So we had that outcome on the national team on the global stage. And then when I went to Harvard, so I was the captain of the Swazi team. The captain of the Australian team, which is the team that beat us in the final, was also in my class at Harvard. This guy's name is Boso. So then we decided to join up and be teammates. So there's world number 1, world number 2, and see what happens. And then we continued to do it in college, and by my third year we won the world championships, which is terrific.
That's powerful. I mean, like from by Swazi, that was something big. Eh?
Yeah, as the first Black African to do it. It was like really, it was great. It was
Is it something that you continue with to date, like in terms of maybe empowering other young people or who are interested in it, or just it's something that you did once?
Yeah, no, it's been a while since undergrad, but immediately afterwards, so the expectation is once you win the World Championships, you kind of leave the debate community. So not leave, but like there's nothing more to compete for, so to speak. So at that point, I kind of transitioned into a giving back phase. So what I did was I was like doing a lot of community associated work. I was a part of the team that brought the World Championships back to Africa. So we hosted some in Cape Town, and that's good because a large part of the barriers to people participating in these things are costs, right? You need to travel to wherever this thing's going to be all over the world, and often the costs are dollar denominated when you have the little money you have in Emalangeni, in the South African case rands, and that sort of thing. So it did like that, good contributing for like 3-4 years, I want to say, but then have transitioned out. Like I'm older, the culture of the debate spaces changed, but sometimes universities will ask me like, hey, could you come speak to our group? And often actually more on the African continent. So I've been to Kampala a couple times, a couple in East Africa as well, just to go chat to people and give them my perspectives on how this works.
Okay, back to Harvard now. Tell us more about Harvard. Like, everyone in the world, I mean, like, would want to. I would love to go to Harvard. Like, I'm sure the same applies to many people, like, especially young people. They would want to go to Harvard. Yeah. How does it feel? Like, what makes it so unique, and what makes it to a place to be, like, for many young people, or for many people, even not just young people?
Yeah. So I think there is a place in the world for places that like have as one of their founding ideals just excellence. And it can be excellence in a wide variety of things. In the case of the university, academics is a large part of it, but it's not the only thing. There are some people who are they're really good at school, so don't get me wrong. Like you can't go there if you're like you really struggle with high school level material, but that's not their thing. Like there's some people who are just like, I am really good at fencing like this, and like that is, I'm like one of the world's best fencers, and I'm passable at academics, but my thing is fencing. And you have that in a wide variety of different sectors. And I think the admissions department focusing on building a class of diversity in experiences as well as interests and focus, I think is the thing that makes the place really quite extraordinary.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, I can't speak more highly of the university experience in undergrad that I had there. Some of the classmates I've made were are going to be my best friends on a like for life essentially, and I don't think that that's uncommon. And yeah, some really extraordinary people. Like they're, if I think about the spectrum of the things that people have done that I had the good fortune of interacting with in undergrad, there's some people who are like senior officials at the US Ministry of Finance, so Treasury, like really, really high up there. Some people worked on presidential campaigns. Some people are, you know, there's this couple I had classes with, they sort of partnered together. Now they run like so it's like, it's litigation financing firm with a portfolio in the hundreds of millions of US dollars. And like, so in a wide variety of different experiences, but like there are extraordinary people that I had the good fortune of meeting in virtue of having gone to this place. So I do it again every time. It was great.
Very interesting. So there's something that I was going through your portfolio, and there's something that you said about Harvard, that every person there is truly invested in your success as an individual.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something about that?
So I think that was more in the PhD program. I don't think it's undergrad. So so after undergrad, I worked for a little bit, and then I did a fellowship, and then now I'm in the finance program at Harvard. It's a joint program between Harvard Economics and the Harvard Business School, the finance unit there. And I think what I'm saying there is like, it's a very tight-knit program. So in the overall program, maybe there are 25 PhDs admitted a year. And then in the finance unit, it's smaller still, 5 or 6 or something like that in the thing. And that is a big investment on the part of the university in the PhDs that they choose. And you know, several hundreds of thousands of US dollars that they sort of fund your research. They give you a little stipend thing to help you through.
Scholarship. You want a scholarship.
So in undergrad, yes, and then in the PhD, it's everyone's there on scholarship. So they'll pick, like I said, 5 or 6 kids in the finance unit. They'll pay for your tuition, and then they'll give you a little stipend over time just to fund your research, right? Okay. So I was there, and in that program especially, given the high degree of care that they devote in choosing their PhDs, the entire institution is pushing for you to have a good academic outcome, and everyone's invested in your success. And the university really puts their resources behind the PhDs that they finance in order to help them succeed. So no, I think that's true.
Oh, that's very insightful. I want us to talk about, is it true that while you was doing your undergrad, simultaneously you were with the Central Bank of Eswatini?
So yeah.
At what point were you at the
Yeah, so I spent a summer here and then did some work a little bit during the school term time. So that was like a part-time basis. But the core thing was the US summer, so that's May to like early September or something like that, is a time where people sort of take a break from the semester and do other things. And I spent my time working one of my summers here at CBE. I was on the National Financial Inclusion Task Force and did some work associated with regulating the markets there to promote financial inclusion.
That's interesting. And that's where you developed interest in policy, economic policy and inequality. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I think I've always had those interests, just from being here. I think you grow up in our society, and there's a lot of good things about our society, and there are also some shortcomings. One of them is this is a highly unequal place. You think about the Southern African region more broadly, and there's a lot of opportunity to improve that. At the same time, I think finance is a very interesting vector by which to achieve that, because if you think about what it is one is the ability for people to sort of basically take a chance on themselves. So I go to some savers if I'm a borrower and sort of say, hey, I've got this thing that I think is high leverage, high return on investment opportunity. Would you use your savings to finance it and get a share of the gains on the long run. So that could be business, that could be home equity financing, that could be whatever it is. So I think those two interests naturally sort of speak to each other. If you think about social mobility, every story of social mobility has a part about how you enable home ownership for people who are sometimes locked out of it, because vast majority of households, that's a large share of their household savings. So I spent some time at CBE thinking about that, and then also in undergrad. So I was a philosophy major, did a little bit of math, but as a philosophy major, and I was thinking about inequality in my experience. So that's what I wrote my college thesis on, and then sort of from a moral perspective, so thinking about the ethical implications of inequality and what we owe each other as mutual citizens engaged in some kind of project for social benefit. So putting together that interest as well as sort of facility with math and interest in policy sort of naturally led me down the path of thinking about financial policy as a lever to deal with some of the social ills you might face, like
And I
inequality.
know you are very interested in policy.
Yeah.
So, can you say something about policy and also in relation to addressing, especially, let us be specific, I think you're mentioning inequalities in Southern Africa or even Africa more broadly. Like, what can be done, like in terms of policy direction to address that?
Hey, that's a very vast question. I don't. It's a very, very vast question. Let me think a little bit around my specific niche. So financial policy, like, because there's a ton that can be done in general to deal with inequality. Like at the simplest level, just more aggressively progressive taxes and redistribution might be a way to do it. But something that's within the political feasibility set is crafting financial policy that incentivizes financial intermediaries to facilitate financial inclusion. So many different things you can do, but here's a simple thing that I was looking at a couple weeks ago: is the share of bank income, Eswatini, South Africa, wherever, share of bank income that comes from transactions versus what you call interest income. So typically, if you think about an income statement of a bank, you have interest income. So I give you a loan to buy a car and you pay some interest back, and that is income for the bank that goes against their costs. Or I give you a debit card, and when you go swipe for your lunch or coffee or whatever, you pay me some amount of money for transactions. One of those is economically beneficial in some deep sense. So that is matching savers and borrowers, which is what financial intermediation is, which is expressed in interest income. The other thing is, it is a service in some sense, like dealing with payments is like an economically real thing, but it's a commodity business. And you can see this if you look at the breakdown of that income in more developed markets versus here. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it's staggering. Just if I have a debit account in the United States, I'm going to pay nothing on transactions, and it's all going to be on interest-bearing income, which is the real economic activity of financial intermediation.
Okay.
The reverse is true here at home. You have some banks with over 60, 70, 80% of income in transactions. And like, there's a way to change these policies and allow people to still make money in business, right? But like, that's just one vector of like thinking very carefully around the policy levers that are available in just crafting smarter policies.
Okay, now, enough of policy.
Yeah.
You're about to confuse me more, but I think I get the point.
Gist, yeah.
Look, after graduating from the undergrad, you went to briefly with Mackenzie. How was that experience?
It was great. McKinsey & Company is at least when I was there, might be world number 2, but at the time I was like the world's largest strategy consulting firm, and is basically, think of it as a training ground for people to understand how large institutions make decisions, essentially is what it is. So you come in as a young person who knows very little, but you have some skills. You can do Excel models, you can present slides, and you're happy to talk to, basically using data to drive decision making for executives. That could be in government, it could be in private sector institutions, it could be in sort of non-profit sector. So that's what McKinsey does. And I went there for a couple of years, and it was reasonably well-trodden path that people spend a couple of years there and then branch off into some sort of specialized area where the training at McKinsey was sort of more generalist training. So I did that for a couple of years in the United States, and yeah, I learned a ton. I think if I think back on that experience beyond like the subject matter, like think about corporations' income statements, or how to reduce costs and increase profit in a sort of sustainable way. I think beyond the subject matter, the stuff I picked up there that is really useful in my view is just balancing personalities in organizations, because ultimately the hardest part of management is dealing with people and figuring out people's various incentives and how they're coming at problems is perhaps the thing I learned the most at my time at McKinsey.
Quite interesting. Is it the one that sparked interest in what you eventually did for your doctorate?
So the doctorate, I think, is more a little bit informed by the CBE experience, as well as I also worked at the Public Service Pension Fund when I was here a little bit, and like and that sort of thing. Is the doctorate thinks about something about frictions to financing in emerging markets in contrast to developed markets. One of the things that, like, one of the core papers is thinking about how the currency mix of debt on corporations' balance sheets affects their growth prospects, what happens in downturns, that sort of thing. So it's like, if I'm Anglo-American in South Africa, do I borrow in ZAR or do I borrow in USD? And what does that mean for real outcomes, employment, growth, profitability, and so on? So that is just a subset of a broader set of questions about how you think about easing financial frictions in emerging markets. That's what the dissertation is thinking about, and the things in my subjective experience that have led me to that interest set. One of these professional experiences I spoke about at CBE, growing up in a highly unequal society. I think from an interest perspective, finance is very interesting because think about almost anything we really want to do that's going to change society. A lot of it involves the deployment of resources in a concerted fashion to generate outcomes. When you think about Waterford, you guys are doing the solar project. And in some sense, the students have got a little bit of experience of what it's like to work on a capital project, right? We need, I don't know, 2-3 million, I don't know, what it is to actually like get the school to a large extent off of the grid. And you can think about society as facing that in a wide variety of problems. Think about the green energy revolution that we're trying to effect, and a bunch of other things. Finance is an important lever there. So that's kind of what led me to the dissertation project and how I'm thinking through some of the questions.
And one of the areas of interest for you is the, I think, effect of the dollar dominance in emerging markets.
Yeah.
Can you say something? Because I think I was reading that you were making mention of examples of, I think, Nigeria or something.
Yeah. So I'm sure in the most non-technical terms, it turns out we have what's called a global reserve currency. That currency is the US dollar. And what that means is, so the US is, I don't know, 20% of global GDP, probably less, but something in that region. But in terms of the world's financialization, something in the region of 60-70% of global financial assets are denominated in dollars. As a share of global trade, something in the region of 80% of global country trade is denominated in USD, like the pricing is invoiced in USD. So the upshot of that is US financial policy has wide-ranging impacts on policy here. So here's something that people are experiencing. Headline interest rates that the CBE sets, something like 10 to 11% or something like that. What that means is it's a lot more expensive than it was in the past for you or me to borrow a car. Borrow money to finance purchasing a car. It's a lot more expensive for you and I to finance investing in a house. Some people finance their children's education using debt, and that's a lot more expensive. It turns out there's a lot of research that thinks about the driver of global interest rates actually being what they call a US factor, which is some sort of residual essentially of what the interest rates are in the United States, which is a little bit crazy, right? You sort of think the Federal Reserve, which is the US central bank, changes interest rates a little bit, and that impacts whether you and I can borrow to buy houses. And that is like a big thing you want to think about if you want to understand how to deal with financing frictions in emerging markets. So I've done a little bit of thinking around dollar dominance.
So basically, I mean, just quite recently, there's a whole discussion about de-dollarization.
Yeah.
Driven by the BRICS and the alternative bloc in terms of to address the concern that you just mentioned. What's your take on that?
So I mean, it's a big question, and I think one thing you learn in doing a PhD is like you answer something very small, very credibly, and then like tell everyone when something else is speculation, right? Okay. So I can talk to you about my dissertation thesis very tightly, but I'll tell you sort of my somewhat informed speculation. Okay. And a lot of these views are actually informed by one of my advisors, guy's name's Ken Roloff. He was a former chief economist at the IMF, and he's done a lot of thinking on dollar dominance. Just dominant, they call them dominant currency paradigms more generally. Okay. And one thing you see in the historical data is it's arguable, but you almost always have a dominant currency paradigm. And part of the reason why this is, and again, there's some good work, Geeta Gopinath, who's a former chief economist at IMF, is also a Harvard a professor, have thought about the basically positive feedback loop between trade invoicing. So you and I want to sell each other stuff across countries. You invoice it in a dominant currency and sort of bank balance sheets. So what financing? So financialization of the world. So your trade invoicing is going to affect your financing needs and how you're going to choose to finance yourself, and that essentially is going to feed back into each other. That always creates, at least if you look at history, a dominant currency paradigm. So the efforts towards de-dollarization that look at doing it with things called SDRs, which is like the IMF's basket of global reserve currencies, like historically there's not a lot of support that something like that is actually viable. What you tend to see if you look at the long history time series is that you're going to have a single currency that's going to be the dominant paradigm. So before you think about de-dollarization, you need to have a perspective on what that alternative is. So there's some people who say things that I think are a little bit less credible, like you can have a world dominated by some kind of crypto thing. That seems unlikely to me. The natural alternative you would think of is like Chinese renminbi. And there's some issues about how close the Chinese economy is that makes that in the short term less likely. The final thing I'll say on this though is when these episodes of dominant currency paradigms change, they shift dramatically. So you and I can sit and say it's highly unlikely that the world's going to de-dollarize tomorrow, but when it does de-dollarize, it's going to de-dollarize in a pretty dramatic fashion. And it's not obvious when that's going to happen, but when it does happen, history says at least it's a little bit of a dramatic shift. So that's sort of my broad set of views on that question.
So there are some of the things to maybe to look at as we discuss, as we have this broader discussion globally about de-dollarization, because for some of us, the lay people, it's just so fancy. Like, oh, there will be an alternative.
Seems implausible.
But it's not as simple as that. Okay. Look, let's talk about UWC experience.
Okay.
You are doing a lot of things. I'm sure right now you are in a hurry to go elsewhere. What can you say about the UWC education vis-a-vis the areas of involvement, your areas of current areas of involvement?
Okay, so what I would say, like speaking to parents about it, is if you have an opportunity to send your children to one of these institutions, it feels to me like a no-brainer. Like the education that you get beyond sort of the like X's and O's in the classroom is immense. Like I remember I was in an econ class and we were talking about hyperinflation cycles, and there was a student in my class who was from Venezuela and someone else who was in my class from Zimbabwe. You know what I mean? And both of them had very tangible experiences of like, here's what hyperinflation feels like. You go into the store one day and bread is a bucket load of cash, and the next day it's a truckload of cash. You know what I mean? And that makes the education experience a lot more tangible than just simply having good teachers and a bunch of clever students. So I think the way I've described it in the past, it's a total education, and I think that is a very valuable thing. The way that has influenced my experience now is I think I've developed in virtue of coming here a global outlook on all the issues I think about. So there is a sense in which you can approach some of the questions I think about in my dissertation, some of the things I'm thinking about in my professional life from a very local perspective. We have XYZ problems in our region, we want to solve them. But I think putting those problems, domestic or regional, in conversation with solutions and problems faced globally, I think gives you a sort of wider range of perspectives that hopefully help you bring sort of more efficacious solutions to bear on whatever you're facing. So no, I couldn't recommend the experience more.
Okay, that's mouthful. And there was a study done by, I think, educators at Harvard. Have you ever heard about it? I think they were trying to understand the impact of a UWC education.
No, I haven't seen the paper.
Yeah. Anyway, I think now I think on diversity specifically. What makes it, I think when you look at Waterford now, we've got over 60 different nationalities, and you are mentioning just one aspect of how it can benefit you while you are. Is is there anything beyond diversity that the UWC experience, or maybe the Waterford experience, maybe to be specific, gives you?
Yeah, I mean, I think diversity is a tag name, but it captures in and of itself a bunch of different vectors of benefits for students. So like I spoke one about just having tangible real world experiences of something you might think about in purely academic terms where you're not to have that facility. I think it broadens your perspective as well to come at problems in a variety of different ways. And I think if you think about the challenges the world faces right now, or challenges Africa faces, to be more specific, given it's Africa Week, a lot of them are going to need creative solutions. And to begin to crack creative solutions, I think you need to be able to tap into a wide variety of wells of knowledge, and you get pushed in that direction if you have an experience that exposes you to some of those wells at an early stage. Maybe the final thing I would say on that is, I think it also gives you a sense of sort of it makes you a little bit more self-aware, I think. And self-awareness is just a virtuous thing in and of itself. When you kind of understand in a little bit better, not perfectly, your role in the world and where you fit in the broader picture, it's easy. You can imagine if this was just a private school, Eswatini, the students who'd come here would sort of leave with a potentially inflated sense of their place in the world. Whereas when you have classmates from Hong Kong and some parts of the United States and South America, Asia, you know what I mean, like having that perspective gives you a sense of self-awareness and humility that I think helps people be more effective agents in the world if you have that. So I would, those are some of my reflections on it.
I think towards the end, it's Africa Week now, which is a week through which the students celebrate the African continent. They look at challenges, opportunities, and you are speaker, you're the opening assembly speaker.
Yeah, it's big.
What can you say about the challenges that the African continent is facing now? Do you think last year during Africa Week there was a conversation? In fact, former President of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, says one of the biggest challenges that the African continent is facing is we make the right decisions, right policy, but the problem is with implementation. And even challenge that maybe one of the Africa Week event must look at that. Given in that context and given what is prevailing now on the African continent.
So my reflections on that.
What would be your reflection on that? Generally.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Brady is like a lot smarter than me. I think that's an uncontroversial statement. I think it's an uncontroversial statement. So I wouldn't disagree with him too much. What I guess I would say on that particular question is policy design should account in and of itself for implementation. So it's no good to have something on paper as like, oh, this is the optimal policy, when the political constraints mean that thing could never be effectuated. So I think if we want to think about what we're calling policy design, I think considerations of the things that make something more or less likely to be implemented from a political or whatever kind of feasibility considerations, feasibility set is relevant. So I think that's kind of what I would say. In that, in terms of the continent more broadly, like I'm obviously in finance, I'm thinking a lot about financial frictions. I think another thing that's really, really big on sort of the medium-term horizon is energy. Like getting energy right. Excuse me, sorry. Is massive, right? There's, and then I'll speak to this a little bit in a couple weeks. So if you want to think about my thoughts on that, you come to send me in a couple weeks. But like, I think energy is a really, really big part of the energy mix, both the transition, but also getting ourselves to comparable sort of per capita energy generation, sort of with global peers in emerging markets. Then the final thing I think is sort of intercontinental cooperation. This has been a theme since the sort of 30s and 40s of sort of Pan-African independence movement that I don't think we've gotten quite right, but it is a very important thing. You think about it at the level of the African Free Trade, so Continental Free Trade Agreement, but then also some of these sort of large-scale infrastructure projects that have the potential to jump us up several years in terms of industrialization and economic opportunity. So the longest time thinking about some of these hydro dams that are trying to get online. This big one in Ethiopia with the Nile, some stuff going on in Congo and that kind of thing. Those things require coordination and cooperation at the country and regional level that I don't think we quite have a handle on how to do, but I think it's going to be a part of the story required to get this next sort of 2-3 decades right from a continental growth perspective.
That's very interesting. Talking of energy, do you think Waterford is making a right decision to move to energy sustainability with the proposed solar farm project?
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I can't. It's tough to say energy sustainability is a bad idea. I don't know what the price is they're paying for the batteries or whatever, which might make it a good or bad investment. But like the spirit of it, yeah, it seems unobjectionable.
Okay, no, thank you so much. And one last, and I always ask, like, Waterford education in one word.
I think stretching.
And stretching.
Stretching is probably what I would say. It's stretching.
Thank you so much, Fanele.
Thank you for having me.
Always
Appreciate
a pleasure
it.
to
Cheers.
have
Cheers.
you
Cheers.
on campus.
Yeah.
Cheers.